So that is a population that we would like to have, or it could sustain larger harvest. Are you guys seeing the, okay, there we go. I clicked it up. The timing of migration is different. So the Atlantic Flyway resident population geese, they're present early, and the North Atlantic population are migrating later, both in the spring and in the fall. So the good question is, why have these resident goose numbers increased so much? It's thought that all these geese we see in the eastern part of North America derived from the giant Canada goose that was thought to be extinct. They were discovered in the early 1960s on a lake in Minnesota, and there was a population of maybe like 100 or 200 individuals. And since that time, they've increased across North America, so now they number in the millions. And one of the things is that at a landscape level, we're creating conditions that are benefiting these Canada geese, as well as a number of other wildlife species. You know, geese are herbivorous, they eat grass, and as well, and they'll go into agricultural fields and eat corn and soya beans and other things like that. So at a landscape level, we've done things to increase and improve the habitat for these geese. And at a local level, we've done a lot of things that have really benefited these temperate breeding resident geese. So golf courses, water retention ponds, rural residential lawns and ponds, removal of shoreline obstructions, all those things have created ideal habitat for Canada geese. And then on the other side of the population growth equation, we've changed the local predator community, as well as the two-legged predators with regard to hunters, especially in urban and suburban areas. So these geese are going into areas that we've created highly nutritious foraging areas for them. We've created the water that they seek for escape, and we have created an environment where they're not subject to hunting pressure or predators. So the populations have increased. And this has resulted in a number of concerns that we at the Canadian Wildlife Service are dealing with on a year-to-year basis. Human safety. There was reports this year of Canada geese along the trails in Moncton attacking cyclists, and I can attest to the fact that there was one goose that was mean, and you'd all of a sudden you'd be cycling by and he'd fly after you, and one guy fell off his bike and another person took a swat at the goose and missed and hurt his arm by swinging at it. So there was those human safety issues. There's the issue of goose droppings in public spaces, which people don't want. And also on residential property. And then there's also issues with farmers. If they're trying to grow winter wheat and other things that are coming up early in the spring, and you have geese coming in, they can really do damage early in the summer. And then last couple of years with the drought conditions, farmers really were not willing to share any of their forage with geese, and were concerned that the geese were eating up too much of the hay. So these are the types of issues that we're dealing with at the Canadian Wildlife Service. So we developed a national framework for managing geese, and we need, a plan to reduce conflicts between geese and people while ensuring conservation. So we manage them within the framework of conservation, like we do other migratory birds and other game birds. So we have to conserve migratory bird populations, and we have to be responsible in the issuance of permits so that we allow management activities by landowners and land managers when birds are causing serious damage or danger. So we're always striking to find that balance between managing and conserving a resource, but also dealing with nuisance geese. Probably 10 years ago or more, we produced a handbook on managing Canada geese in southern Canada. That's available now on the Environment and Climate Change Canada website. And if you haven't had an opportunity to look at it, it's quite a good summary of the issues. We talked about the biology of Canada geese, goose management, seasonal aspects of deterrence, different ways you can control geese, and ways to reduce agricultural conflicts. And if you do a Google search on the internet for managing Canada goose issues or nuisance Canada geese, there's a lot of good information out there now. The issues we're dealing with in New Brunswick, other jurisdictions have been dealing with for at least 15 or 20 years. So a lot of this stuff, it's not new, it's just finding better and more effective ways to deal with it. So we're, like I mentioned, we're trying to find that right balance for farmers, landowners, the general public, hunters, and geese. Whenever we always have to be cognizant of the fact that people have different perspectives and different management desires for geese. If you're a landowner and you have geese on your property, you may say, well, why don't we just shoot them all? And then you have other parts of the population that don't believe in hunting or any sort of killing of geese. So we're constantly trying to find that balance. And as Jacinth will mention later with the permitting process, it's very much based on landowner. So if you're the landowner, you have more control and say about how those geese are managed versus somebody who doesn't own that land and may have certain perspectives. So I'm going to talk about the biology of temperate breeding resident Canada geese because it really influences what types of control measures and management we can enact to try to reduce conflict. So, and throughout this presentation, if I have that, the acronym TBR, that just stands for temperate breeding resident Canada geese. So these geese, they're not going to breed until they're 2 to 3 years of age. So when you see in the spring, if you see two birds together, that's probably a breeding pair. But if you see a group of 10 birds just kind of hanging out and not being aggressive to each other, that's probably non-breeding subadults. So these breeding pairs, they're going to establish a territory in early April. So as soon as they can start breeding, they're going to. So they're one of the first breeding waterfowl we have in the region. They're going to be seeking a territory and open water as soon as the ice goes out. So they're looking for 3 things for a breeding area. They're looking for open water, which they use to escape from predators. They're looking for something to eat. And like I mentioned, they're herbivorous, so grass, mown grass, hay fields, cranberries, for example. And the other thing that geese really, really like is a nesting island because they're safe from predators. So in this slide here, there's a goose nest on top of a muskrat house. But if you also have like a physically created island in the middle of a pond, they just love that. So that's typically, if you have that, you're going to have a pair of geese wanting to nest there. So a goose typically will lay 6 to 10 eggs, and they will lay those eggs in a very secluded spot. But as the picture on the left shows, here's a Canada goose in an urban setting who's laid eggs in a big planter. So, they're very adaptable in some situations to human built environments. So after they lay 6 to 10 eggs, it's usually 1 egg a day. It's a 25-day incubation period. So around the first week of May, we're going to start seeing broods. And the picture on the left, you see these young goslings that have just hatched. They're bright yellow. And in the center picture, you see goslings that are probably about 25 days. They're starting to replace some of that down with feathers, adult body feathers, contour feathers. And then in the bottom right, you can see young of the year that are getting pretty close to being able to fly. So it's about a 60-day period between hatch and the birds being able to fly. And so, you know, during that time period, these birds are, the adults are not wanting to move these birds very far. And the other thing to mention too is that these adults are also undergoing a molt during this time period. So they'll start molting their feathers in early June, and they're going to be flightless for 4 to 6 weeks. So during that period of June to mid-July, both the young of the year and the adult birds are flightless. So if you're trying to scare birds out of an area and hoping that they're going to fly away, it's just not going to work because they can't fly. So they would have to walk to another location. And so they're very, very reluctant to leave an area. And if you were to force them out of an area, they're going to be subject to high predation pressure and getting struck by vehicles, et cetera. The other thing we'll see during mid-June through July is that you can get birds coming, these subadult non-breeding geese coming into an area just to molt. So all of a sudden, if you had 2 or 3 pairs on a lake, by mid to late June, you might have 100 birds. And these are all birds that are not breeding, but they've come to this area to molt. And so what they're looking for in a molting site is the ability to go out on open water and escape predators, mammalian predators like coyotes and foxes. And they're also looking for areas that they can feed on, because when they're growing their feathers, they need lots of protein, and fertilized lawns are a really good source of high nitrogen food. By August, mid-July and through the month of August, these geese are all flighted, so they can fly. So they're mobile, and they're going to be traveling in family groups and looking to find the best feeding sites. So in August, they are mobile and they can move around. So we've instituted September hunting seasons to try to control the population growth of Canada geese, of these temperate breeding resident Canada geese. And the early hunting season in New Brunswick was initiated back in 2007. So like I mentioned, these geese are having young, they're flightless up until mid-July. And then in August, they're flying around. And then in September, currently it's this first day after Labor Day, Monday, the hunting season starts, and we're proposing next year to even start it on September 1 to allow that hunting season. It's a very liberal daily bag limit, up to I think 8 birds a day. And that's because these are the temperate breeding resident geese that can sustain high harvest pressure. So we want to, you know, as much as possible, control these populations and do that in a way that doesn't affect these more northern breeding North Atlantic population of Canada geese. So I'm going to talk briefly about managing Canada geese. And I think it's important to note that no one approach is going to be 100% successful. So throughout the breeding season, I think it's going to be important to use multiple approaches. You have to be persistent. You know, people talk about scaring. You know, if you do it one day and then you don't do it for 7 or 8, the geese aren't really going to move on. So you have to be persistent in terms of trying to scare the geese away, but also in terms of habitat management. I think one of the important messages is that you really need to start in April and May to prevent the geese from nesting. Some locations where it's mostly seasonal residents, you know, they'll show up in July and there'll be geese all over the place, or June, and want to do something about it. But like I mentioned earlier, the geese are flightless, they have young, so it's very hard to get them to move on then. So it's easiest if you can prevent them from nesting, and do that April, May, when they first start to show up and scout for nesting locations. Another important thing is to reduce that access between land and water with fencing. The photo on the left shows wire fencing. There's 3 strands there, one being low, the other one, 16 inches high, and the other one about 2 feet. That can work. But in my observations and experience, snow fencing just stuck in the ground with rebar seems to be most effective. It's tall enough to prevent geese from easily hopping over it or crawling under it. You can overlap it so that from the lake or from the land, it looks like it's a continuous barrier to access, but there's actually a way that you can kind of walk through it. So visually, it looks like it's a total barricade, but you can overlap it so that it's not. Other techniques to scare that you can do without a permit, you can use dogs. In some locations in the United States, they actually have pest or goose control companies that will come with border collies, and they're trained to chase after the geese. And if you harass them enough, they'll move on to another area that they find more less disturbance for them. Humans, as a human, you can scare them away as well as using noisemakers. And again, it's a matter of, the geese, if they're on the water and if they see a fence, they're not going to go up in that area. But if there's a way for them to come in from the sides, that can happen. So it's important that, if you're on a lakefront and you all have mown lawns, if you're just the one person putting up snow fencing, the geese can travel overland and also be on your property. So it's important to take kind of a community or a lake association approach to whatever methods you're trying to use to reduce the goose presence. Here's a picture of another management approach, so increasing the amount of rough and tall vegetation around the water. Again, there's this barrier, physical barrier between the water and the mown area. Geese aren't going to be wanting to eat goldenrod, but also they don't really like to walk through tall vegetation. That tall vegetation could be hiding predators, so geese are very reluctant to walk through it, and they try to avoid this tall vegetation. And there are lots of lakes in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, and predominantly we have goose issues on those where people have built cottages and removed the native vegetation and put in mowed lawns with nicely fertilized green grass, because those are the 2 things that geese really like: open water and green grass. Another option, and I've seen this advertised on the internet, and the city of Moncton installed some this year, are LED lights on open water. These lights flash at night, and the height of the light and the height of a goose's eye, it disturbs them, so it can cause geese to no longer want to raft at that site. The city of Moncton reports that they had mixed success on this. Some nights there were no geese on the water, and on another night they said that the geese were actually all around these lights. So mixed success there, and they are pricey. They're on the internet they're listed as $400 US per unit. So, and you'd have to have several of them on a large body of water. So overall, managing Canada geese, the best time of the year for dealing with them is in early spring, and try to prevent them from nesting. Everything after that becomes a little bit more difficult. In the middle of the summer, it's a very difficult period of time to be dealing with nuisance geese, because they are with young and they're not capable of flying. So in the middle of the summer, in June, July, when people want to enjoy their cottages and the weather is warm, like I mentioned, to get the best approach at that point in time is really to focus on keeping them away from sensitive areas. So if you're on like the Yoho Lake, And you can keep them off mown lawns and your docks, and they could go to a more natural area. That might be the best approach for that time period. Overall, like I mentioned, there's a number of cottage associations and municipalities that have developed goose management plans, and they're available on the internet. Culling or depopulating a local area is not an effective long-term approach, because if you kill all the geese on that lake or in an area this year and the habitat is still good, next year you're going to get a whole bunch of new geese coming in there and saying, this is a great spot. I have a nice place to sleep and I have all kinds of food. It's like your Uncle Larry that you don't really want visiting your cottage. If you don't want him coming there, don't offer him a free bed and all he can eat and drink. So, you know, it's all about trying to change the habitat so it's not as good for the geese. If you do want to receive a permit to scare with a firearm or scare to kill, etc., that Jacinth is going to explain next, it's important to start early because it does take us some time to process the application. So it's important, you know, if you're contemplating some work that requires a permit, to start early, such as in February, just because, you know, by the time you think about it in April, May, it may be too late for us to get you a permit in order for it to be really effective. And I'll let Jacinth talk about the permitting process. And you can just tell me when to change the slide, Jacinth, and I'll do that.
Okay, perfect, thank you. So as Bonnie's mentioned, I'm the permits officer, so whenever you have any questions about permits, feel free to reach out. I'll give a brief overview of the permitting process. A few points to keep in mind. Permits are issued to like a landowner or somebody who leases or manages the land. So like Al said, if you're the landowner, you're the one that would be responsible or to manage the geese on that property. If you're hiring a pest control company or a wildlife control company, they could be listed as a nominee on your permit so that they would be authorized to conduct activities, but it would only be, you would be the one applying and giving them permission to do so. And as Al has mentioned before too, you need to start applying those deterrences early on. And if you know that you're having issues with geese, then you should request a permit. Like, feel free to apply in February or a little bit before. I'll talk about a service standard after, but it's 35 days, and it depends on the amount of applications we get and the amount of reviews we need to do. In the spring, it's our busiest time for permits, so it's good to get a head start on those. As per the migratory birds regulations, if the geese are causing damage to crops or other property, you don't need a permit to scare them away with any methods unless you're using an aircraft or a firearm. You do have to keep in mind that whatever method you're using cannot injure or harm the geese as you're trying to scare them. So things such as noisemakers, dogs, or scaring them away yourself does not require a permit. Habitat modifications such as fencing, tall grass and vegetation does not require a permit also. And we always, there is a section on the application form that we ask that you list all of the methods that you've tried before to deal with the issue. So once you start having issues with geese, we usually recommend, as Al has mentioned, fencing and habitat modification or other types of scaring to deal with the issue and try to get them to move along. So in the application, there's a section that you have to state that you've tried different methods before we do issue a permit. If you do apply for a permit and you've never attempted anything, we may recommend certain techniques to be tried or kind of work with you to help develop a management plan. And it does require a long-term approach. There is also a section about this on the application form. While permits are helpful, they're not usually a long-term solution. So we want you to use other methods along, even if we issue a permit, we still want you to use those fencing and habitat modifications and other types of scaring to kind of get the geese to move along. So you can move on to the next slide. So the things we do consider that you do require a permit for, and that we'll consider a permit for if the geese are causing damage. There's the collection, destruction, and disposal of eggs. Normally these permits will authorize you to prevent eggs from hatching, so they can be sterilized, either coated with oil or shaking or PSG eggs, so that the geese will continue to look after them for some time and won't rehatch. So another option is scaring with an aircraft or firearm. This includes drones. They're considered aircrafts. So if other scaring techniques, sometimes shooting blank loads up at the geese will help to move them along. One thing to keep in mind though, especially with your smaller community, a lot of municipal communities and provincial governments have restrictions on the use of firearms. So it's very important that you check with both your provincial and your municipal agencies to make sure that you're authorized to use a firearm. Even if we do issue you a permit to scare with a firearm, this doesn't override those other regulations. So there is a condition on the permit that you need to abide by all provincial and municipal regulations. And the last one, we also, for more severe damage, will issue permits that kill to support scaring. This is not eliminating all the geese. You'll kill a small amount of migratory birds to get the rest of the flock to move along. So standards are usually about 2 per day and a max of 10 per week. And like I've mentioned, killing is not the purpose of this permit. It's just to try to scare them along, get them to move along. And this too, you'll have to check with your provincial and municipal agencies to make sure you're allowed to use the firearms. You can move to the next slide, Al. Thanks. So if you do decide to apply for a permit, our application forms are available online, or you feel free to reach out. My contact information will be at the end. I can provide those forms, and we have an instruction sheet that goes with it. But once we get the permit application, within a couple days, you'll get an email that confirms the application and tells you that our service standard is 35 days. Doesn't mean that it's going to take that long. It really depends on how many applications we have, how complete the application is. So the initial review will be done by myself. I'll review to make sure all the information is included. One of the most important parts of the application, I believe it's section 3, but this is where you're going to discuss the type of issues that you're having, so the damage or the danger that's occurring on your property. You'll have to discuss the different methods that you've attempted to deal with the problem geese. Be sure to include lots of details, and what's your long-term management plan to help and deal with this issue. So it's important to include a lot of details in this section, because this is what's going to help us assess what's happening on your property and what we could do to help with this issue. So once I've looked at all of that, I'll usually consult with Al. So it goes through the scientific review process, and he'll make recommendations based on the information provided in the application. We may go back to you for some more details if there's not enough information. And once I receive those recommendations, I'll draft a permit based on those recommendations, and I'll get it approved by management. And once a permit is issued, you'll get it usually by email unless you request it by mail. One thing to keep in mind, the permit holder needs to sign the permit in order for the permit to be valid. So there is a condition on that permit, and we ask that you read all of the conditions on the permit before you do sign it to make sure that you understand all of the conditions and that you're agreeing to abide by all those conditions. And if you have any questions, we can certainly clarify those. And for damage or danger permits, a report will be due. If you're just scaring with a firearm, we don't require reports, sorry. But for kill to scare activities, you'll have to submit a report within 15 days of when the permit expires. And if you're just for egg collection, it would be within 30 days of the permit expired. We can move to the next slide. So as we've mentioned before, it's important to check with your province as they may have additional requirements either to deal with wildlife or to use firearms. So be sure to check with your department. It's also important to maybe let them know that. So if you do get a permit, especially to use firearms, it's good that your local department of DNR is aware of these activities because they often get calls from either your neighbors or a nearby community that will hear the activity going on. So if they're aware that you have a permit to do this, this makes it easier for them to get those calls. Did I miss something else? And yeah, with firearms, like there's a lot of restrictions that you need to keep. Minimum distances from residences and businesses during or outside of the hunting season. So sometimes, although you apply for a permit, if you do check with your municipality, you may not be authorized to conduct the activities that we would normally authorize. So it's important to check these. Like I've mentioned, if we do issue a permit, it doesn't supersede any other of these regulations. There is always a condition on those permits that explains this and that tells you that you need to abide by all other laws and regulations for this permit to be valid. And yeah, a few resources, as Alice mentioned, the handbook for managing Canada geese sits on our website. I think I had provided Bonnie and with a copy. Feel free to reach out to me if you need more of those. There's also a section on our website that discusses different management techniques and has a great little document on how to develop a management plan. And the permit forms are also available online, but I can provide a PDF copy via email as well. And our contact information is on the following slide. Feel free to reach out to me directly, but if you're submitting permit applications and in general permit questions, sometimes it's best to contact that permitting inbox. So if ever that I wouldn't be around for an extended period, then whoever would be managing that inbox would be sure to get back to you. I guess now we could probably take some questions unless Al had anything else to add.
No, nothing to add at this point. So we're Jacinth and I are available to answer any questions. And I guess the first question I have is how many geese would be on Yoho Lake and how many properties would be suffering or subject to negative consequences, impacts of geese?
Maybe I can take a first stab at that. I think the count was up to 30 some this past summer. Each year it's been a lot more, and this time. I see your hand, Diana. I'll call on you just next. I see, and so there is, it has been quite a bit of increase. The properties will vary. Our biggest area is at the Scout Camp, which is at the far end of our lake. And they have had a fair impact there, and they're cooperating with the Yoho Lake Association to look at what can be done to help reduce the impact on their land. As far as others, there's particular coves that will have more impact than others, and there may be a number of properties in that cove. And then other areas, because of their location and not sort of sheltered, or maybe having more vegetation, don't have it. Around the lake we have, and Walter or Sean can correct me, but I think we look at 150 properties or 180 when we're doing a mailing. Sean, maybe you can help me. Or Walter.
Yep, it's 180, sorry.
Okay,
Took me a
there's
minute to find.
180 properties around the lake.
And when we went
It's-
around this summer, we have on average, what we figured by driving around on the boat was somewhere for this year was 400 yards of fencing between the Scout Lodge and then just problem properties that we could see just by visually looking, whether they wanted it or not. We just did a measurement on them of easily accessible grassed areas that the geese can use.
So I may just, for your information, Al, and then I'll call on Dinah. She's had her hand up. We did apply through the Environmental Trust Fund and we got dollars available for goose fencing, planning to use snow fencing and rebar. And we also got dollars for planting of vegetation. We asked for people to put up their hands if they wanted vegetation. We would supply it and help, but they would need to make sure it was put on their property. And we've been trying to get, and I know I have a question about what's the right kind of stuff, but we do have dollars for vegetation and dollars for education. So we do, but this is the first year we will have tried mitigation measures like that. Dinah, you've been patient.
Thank you. I'm just wondering where, if the geese are eating nitrogen rich food, when they poop it out, are they pooping out nitrogen rich? And then also, if they're doing it, do they do it in the water or do they only do it on land?
My experience is that they're going in the air, on the land, and in the water. So yeah, they're defecating all the time. There's that expression like S through a goose. So it's true. They have, they're eating a large volume of forage. So it's going through them at quite a rate. In terms of eutrophication, it's probably the nitrogen is not as readily available for nutrient uptake as it would through nitrogen fertilizer, for example. So I don't think you have to worry about the goose poop causing eutrophication in the lake so much as, the fertilizer use and septic systems. The real issue with the goose species is that if you're trying to enjoy your lawn or a boat dock, that nobody wants to be stepping through goose species.
Yeah. The other question, what we've noticed is that there's a lot more sort of green scum in the water. And so would the geese, because they're also depositing in the lake, would that end up being something that would increase that amount of green scum that we're seeing?
I don't think it would be the goose species per se. I think, in my experience, if you're fertilizing lawns, it's that runoff from the lawns is probably more responsible for algal blooms than, the goose excrement.
Okay, where will we get an idea of what the chemical composition of goose feces is?
There might be some literature on it where they were looking at the efficiency assimilation, like from a wildlife management perspective. They've sometimes looked at, well, how much food is there available and how efficient is a goose at converting food to protein, etc. So there might be some information there. I had a look quickly. I noticed that Yoho Lake is part of the provincial surface water monitoring program. So I was looking at some of those numbers just yesterday and today, and Yoho Lake is relatively large volume, and so the nitrogen and phosphorus levels and even E. coli in the lake were all within acceptable parameters. So I don't think that the geese are really going to drive eutrophication in that lake, especially if you're dealing with 30.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Lisa, LD.
Yes, I have a question. I've heard like down in like Maine and some places up in Ontario that there's so many geese that they're actually ruining lakes and stuff. So, and down in the States, they're removing like down in Maine, I've seen them removed when there's too many geese. So how much would be like too many geese on this lake before, they take it over?
I don't have a scientific answer to that question, but I would say it would be in the order of hundreds. You look at a lake system and populated with fish, and those fish are also converting vegetative matter through their systems and making it into a more labile form of nutrients. So, these lakes are living systems. And so there is going to be both within the lake and adjacent watershed, there's going to be animal material moving through that. But I think in a lake the size of Yoho Lake, it would be in the order of hundreds before the geese would have any appreciable impact on water quality and nutrient availability. And we have some molting lakes, for example, in Prince Edward Island, where we have 300-400 birds on that lake for weeks on end. And Parks Canada has been monitoring the water quality there, and it doesn't have an impact.
Ellen, if I may, Al, I know you say there's not a lot of nitrogen unless it's not as bad as the fertilizer, but when one reads about how much nitrogen can be in goose droppings, and since we sit close to a lot of farm fields which have a lot of nitrogen used on them, don't have a lot of maybe runoff of nitrogen into our water, although our septic issue is one we're also working on. But interesting, when we didn't have activity at our Scout Lodge last year, or the year before last, the year before last, because of the situation with COVID, that was the area where we had a lot of geese. They were undisturbed. And we also had our first blue-green algae bloom. So some of us put 1, 2, and 3 together and are not maybe as quick to say, and I hope that it's scientifically okay to say that it's not going to cause a problem, because feces from geese is high in nitrogen if they feed off of fields where there's nitrogen being used as a fertilizer for growth. And we've got a lot of farmland around us. So I guess, are you really comfortable in saying it's not high in nitrogen?
I would say that 30 geese on a lake wouldn't be enough to cause a blue-green algae outbreak. We are seeing more blue-green algae outbreaks, and that coincides with warmer summer water temperatures. And last year was really dry, if you recall. So you have, that if you don't have mixing in a certain cove, and if I recall from the water depth map up by the scout camp, it's relatively shallow. So that can really cause potential impacts with blue-green algae. The other thing to remember too is that the geese during June, July, if they're with young, they're not going to be feeding in agricultural fields and bringing that nitrogen back to the lake. They're going to be, foraging along the shoreline.
Okay, I'm just looking at something here saying an average goose poops about every 12 minutes, so which translates into about 100 times a day per goose. So anyway, that's a lot of, and our lake's not huge. All right, any other questions? I don't see, I'm scrolling here to see hands up or the down at the bottom, that reactions. You can put up the emoji that looks like a Yahoo. Walter, and then Richard.
I was just wondering, as far as vegetation goes, like stuff we're planning, does it matter if it's like a hardwood species, or would trying to deter the geese from entering your property, whether the flowers or the hard stem flowers and that type of thing would deter them? Most properties don't have a problem with them in the springtime and nesting. It's mostly during the summer, trying to keep them off their lawns and that type of thing. So would hard stem flower type vegetation be appropriate?
Yeah, I think the hard stem flowers would be a denser cover of vegetation versus your deciduous trees, because once they start growing up, they're going to be, a large stem, and then most of the volume of foliage is going to be above goose height. So you want a really dense cover of vegetation up to about 3 feet.
Anything else, Walter?
No, I think that might alter our plans and what we're going to buy for plants and that, and what we can offer the landowners. I think we should have a look at maybe what's available in hard stem plants and go with the flower type instead of say dogwoods or cedars or that type of thing. So that's all. Thank you.
Okay, Richard.
I'm wondering if there's any research regarding birth control. Is there things that you can feed geese to keep them from reproducing?
I think rather than doing that, what they found to be most cost effective is the sterilization of the eggs. So you have to find the nest. Well, first, I don't think that they've effectively been able to do birth control for geese. And so they've opted to do the sterilization of eggs, where you either shake the eggs or oil them or puncture them so that they don't hatch. And basically the geese will spend the entire nesting season sitting there incubating these eggs. And at the end, after 30 days, they realize that they're not going to hatch. If you just go in and take the eggs away and destroy them, the geese will very quickly start laying a new clutch of eggs. So that's the approach.
So it requires finding the nest, though.
Yeah, and the nests are fairly easy to find. Like I mentioned, unlike a duck, a goose doesn't really want to be in dense cover because they're afraid that predators are going to be able to sneak up on them. So they're nesting early in the season. So there's not a lot of green vegetation around. So if they're on a nesting island or something, it's easier to find the nest.
Thank you.
Just on chat, I just want to, any of you see at the bottom of your screen, there's a chat function, and Gwen Martin has put up an article on effective goose droppings on lakes. So she gives a HTTP address there of articles and mentions that the other factor is that the level of Yoho Lake in 2020 was the lowest it had been in many, many years. And that's for sure. But you can check on the chat for that website that Gwen has cited. Okay, other questions? See any other hands up? All right. And just give people a minute. Okay, Sean? Do you have a question, or is that hand from a previous time?
No, that was for this time. So I guess that our biggest thing that we've been noticing is that the population of the geese seems to be growing quite a bit every year. So, and like LD, I think was getting at, was how long before we should start really focusing on them instead of having to worry about 200 or getting into the 200s before we start dealing. Should we be dealing with them now to try and keep them at a minimum, or not worry about it, I guess would be the way to put it. But I mean, there's a lot of cottage owners that are definitely worried about it right now, and they definitely want to do something, but we just want to do what we're allowed and what capable, and what we don't want to hurt the population, but we definitely want to help our population live with them.
I think now is the time to deal with this issue before they really get established. Geese and a lot of waterfowl species, they're site philopatric, meaning if they successfully breed in 1 year, they're going to go back there. So as soon as you can start making this area less attractive for geese, the sooner you'll resolve your problem. You know, if you're willing to live with a few, like 5 pairs of Canada geese for the aesthetics, and you can, you know, control, and they could not be on people's lawns, then that might be a solution that you could live with. But again, it's dealing with the geese now, and it's important to note, you know, are you dealing with these nesting geese, or if is it birds coming in to undergo molting, or is it birds in August? So if it's birds in August and they're flighted and you wanted to go out and discharge a firearm or find some other way to make them fly away, then that's a suitable approach in August and September once the geese are flighted. So it's just that difficult period when you have young and the geese are flightless and the young can't go anywhere. So, you know, ethically, it's more difficult to deal with geese, you know, because we're also concerned about, you know, animal welfare, et cetera. So.
LD.
So it's actually Matt, her husband.
Hi, Matt.
So if we actually knew where a nest was, what could we do about it at this point right now? Can we do anything without a permit or with a permit, or?
Can we destroy it?
You could destroy the nest. Well, technically, well, I'll put it this way. Geese do not necessarily use the same nest bowl year after year. They may use like a similar site. So I would kind of flag where that nest is and wait for them to show up and start rebuilding it, and either scare them away or wait until the nest has 6 or 7 eggs in it, and then go back, scare the adults off. You'd need a permit for this, and then oil the eggs or addle the eggs or puncture the eggs. So we make a note of where these potential good nesting sites are. And if there's an opportunity to kind of fence so it's not easy to get in and out of from the water, and then also go back in and prevent the eggs from hatching.
So if we were to find a nest right now, would it be of help to get rid of that nest so they don't have the exact spot to come back to?
It really wouldn't help because they make a new grassy nest every year. They might use the same muskrat house or the same island, but they're not actually using the same physical nest bowl.
Okay, thank you.
Because we've tried everything, and in August, they just fly into our land. So it's just very frustrating.
Yeah, so those are flighted birds. So they're coming in to feed on your lawn, or what are they doing?
Well, we do have a big waterfront property, so we do have fencing up, We tried string, we've tried everything, but every time we come back, we even stay there a lot in the summer. And every time we leave, there's a big, we're picking up feces, and it's in the water, it's disgusting. Like
Jerry Chessie Cove is very bad for this.
Yeah.
They seem to be nesting down in the corner. It's a shallow area with marshy over in
marshy.
the corner. There's an outlet or inlet, whatever you want to call it, in that area. So I'm 100% sure they have a nest in there, because they come in and out of there at night and mornings, and they use the 4 properties or 5 properties right along there quite readily. Most weekends, Friday nights, we show up and we have to shovel for an hour and a half sometimes to pick it all up, so that our dogs, kids can actually walk on the property.
So you mentioned the cove. Is that the one that's in the bottom southeast corner of Yoho Lake?
Correct. So you'd be coming, if you were coming out of the scout camp, you would turn right.
Okay.
The first cove down into the corner.
Yeah, it's down towards the scout end of the lake, and looking from the scout end down, it's on the right.
And this is the first year that I actually counted 40 geese, 40 one day, with all their little babies and everything.
Yeah, so again, you know, we're dealing with different approaches for the different geese. So if they have the babies, then they've definitely nested somewhere there. And so fencing along the water is going to prevent them from walking up onto your property. If it's in August and the geese are flying over top of the fence, those are post-breeding subadults, or sorry, post-breeding adults or non-breeding subadults. And so there is going to have to be a scaring technique to get rid of them.
I agree. Like, they're climbing over the fence.
Yeah, and you were using wire, right?
No,
we had some snow fencing, and we actually put ropes out in the water, 6 inches above the water, that they were jumping over that and then jumping over the fencing.
And how high was the snow fencing?
2 feet.
Okay. Yeah, you may need the taller, like a full 3 feet.
they're knocking it down. There's so many of them.
And again, you know, if we get it, if the other option is in August, you know, the birds can fly away. So if you can legally discharge a firearm and meet minimum requirements from other dwellings, that's the time of year that, you know, we would issue, or we can issue kill to scare permits, where you're physically killing birds and that scares away the rest of them. And like I mentioned, we don't want to do that for birds that can't fly, or with young, because they can't fly away to a different area. But in August, these birds are capable of flying. And, you know, first we want people to try non-lethal means of scaring them away. And after they've exhausted that as a method, then we can escalate it to kill to scare, with the emphasis being that you are killing a few birds to scare away some. So if it's a flock of 40 and you go in and you shoot and kill 2 of them, then hopefully the 38 that are surviving, you're going to say, no, we don't want to go to that property because he's going to kill us.
So at any given point on our lake, I don't think there's any chance of firing a firearm. There's not any distance, I don't believe anyways. Like, I'm not a hunter, but I don't, from what I've been told, you can't. What about using like firecrackers?
Yeah, firecrackers are, you could use those without a permit.
Perfect.
Well, without a federal migratory game bird permit, I don't know if firecrackers are illegal in New Brunswick. I don't know.
We'll find out.
Lisa and Matt, I think too, if you could work with us, since we do have some ETF money and we have some money for fencing, maybe we can help enhance what you've been able to do. I know it's not the final source, but it might help.
Bonnie, we'd accept any help, and we'll help you.
Okay, we will definitely be in touch. I'm going to move along if that's okay. Walter has his hand up and Dinah, but before I go there, I'm going to read something on chat from Gwen. Lawns are by far the main problem. If we had no lawns, we would have almost no on-land geese interfering with cottage owners. If all cottage owners with lawns and the scout camp with its huge lawn down to the lake took action in spring 2022 by making their grass inaccessible, installing noisemakers, etc., all at once, then that would deter the geese in 2022. The word would get out. Once, I think it's Chris. The geese really enjoy pooping on my kid's yellow water mat. We started bringing it in every day when not in use. And I know that was my problem. I have a nice green tarp on mine because the kids couldn't get on it. For every morning I had to go out and clean it up. Okay, Walter.
Just wondering about the sanitation program with the eggs and that. What kind of oil do you use to put on the eggs, and what kind of puncture do you need to puncture the eggs? So they, just by puncturing, will that kill the eggs?
So with regard to the oiling, it's a mineral oil. And in the handbook, it would describe that. And with regard to puncturing, it's just a pinhole. So when the goose, the young embryo is developing, it's got an air sac in there. So when you puncture it, you destroy that, and it kind of dries out the embryo inside.
Okay, Dinah.
What would you to puncture?
I think
I'm
they
just
use,
wondering what would you to puncture the?
yeah, I think it's a small nail or like a darning needle. I can check on that. I've never done it personally myself.
My question
Because
is,
a goose egg be quite hard.
Yeah.
Anyways.
Okay, Dinah.
my question is, how do you fence, or can you fence around a marshy area? Because that seems to be there's one corner, and it would be really difficult to fence in a marsh.
Yeah, and I don't think you'd want to fence an entire marsh, because that's depending on who owns it as property, but you'd really be impacting the ability of all kinds of wildlife to move. I think, the fencing is typically done to keep the birds from moving from a water body up onto grassy areas. And if you have geese that are up in there nesting, then it's probably your focus should be on trying to prevent them from nesting, either through scaring or by oiling the eggs. I think oiling's probably, going back to the conversation about puncturing the eggs, oiling's probably an easier methodology.
Okay, thank you.
Dick.
My question, well, it's not really a question, but I understand, and I don't know this for a fact, but a good bit of our problem, Yoho, is the fact we have a little lake just south of Yoho, and the birds go in there and nest and start their young there, and then they all end up in the main lake. And that's private property, I think. I don't know who owns it, but I think that's a problem for us.
So the lake just immediately south of Yoho Lake?
Yeah, Little Yoho, I think it's called.
Okay.
I believe it's connected with a short stream.
Yeah, and it's surrounded by a bog.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just looking on Google Earth as we talk. Yeah, so again, if the birds are migrating in through there, that's a more difficult situation. And again, if the birds are nesting on the little Yoho Lake and coming up, it's because they have access to green manicured lawns. So again, trying to prevent them from coming up onto people's properties might, that's the first approach in terms of trying to reduce conflicts.
I'm not sure what time of year they start becoming a problem. It seems to me there are young geese there that can't fly. I don't see them nesting there at Yoho. They may have, but there are geese there that can't fly. So I'm assuming they're either nesting around the lake or they're coming up that stream from the little lake.
Yeah, so in that case, it's all about, trying to limit where they're going and limit their impact. So somebody that said they had a water carpet, that's ideal for geese. They're on the water, safe from predators, and B, they don't even have to swim. So that's going to be a great spot for a goose, and they're going to poop all over it. So.
Yeah. Thank you.
Richard, there is a new owner down there. I don't know that we've connected with them from the association, may wish to. They posted on our site the other day about some hunting that was going on down there.
Okay.
That was the first I'd seen a note, knowing there's a new, so we'll maybe reach out and see if we can connect with them and see what there is there too.
Okay, thank you.
And an observation would be, with the scout camp, if there aren't people there all week and geese have full unrestricted access to feeding all over a large lawn, that's going to be, a large attractant for them. And I guess that's the other issue. If you're not at the lake all week and there to scare the geese away, they look at you as the intruder when you show up on the weekend and are dismayed that there's goose poop everywhere because the geese are going to have been there all week. So again, we have to think about, ways that you can keep the geese off your property, even if you're not there to scare them.
Yeah, we're working with a scout owl camp, and they are amenable for us putting fencing up along that surface. And we're also talking about what we might be able to do in vegetation over part of it, given that they still have to have access for their canoes and their water activities with the kids. But if we can have some combination, at least we're trying that way.
And the nice thing about the snow fencing is you can have it overlap so you can find your way through it, but then even B, if it's pretty much closed, but then you have a swinging opening gate with it that you can easily lift up the rebar, swing it open, people can walk down to the beach, drag your canoes and whatnot, and then close it back up.
So if we were to do snow fencing on a place such as that and get it up early, like you say, before, I think you said March, April, which is what we were thinking, how long do you leave that up?
It would be for the summer, as long as the geese are there and you don't want them going up onto your green lawns, you have to maintain that fencing.
Okay, and that may end up being our problem area, but all right. Any other questions? We've been at this in about an hour and a half, and I sure appreciate everybody's question and time and attention, but are there any last minute? And these two people, Jacinth and Alan, are very, very amenable to for us to contact again. So we can always, if there are other things that come up, we can always reach out through the association to them. So Sherry, did you have another question? I see Sherry Hansen. Do you have a question there? I see a sign up. You're muted, Sherry. I'm not sure I can unmute you. There you go. Did you have a question, Sherry?
It's Richard. Rick,
Oh, hi, Richard.
I'm just curious to know, like, if they're not, if they're not able to get off the lake, like onto a lawn or an area away from the water, would that mean that they're not interested in the water per se?
No, it's, there's lots of lakes. It's that combination of open water and feeding areas. So they would probably move on to another area if they couldn't access green grass.
So
Okay, thank you.
they need both. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. Thanks for that. Anyone else? Okay, I am going to call it a night, and thank you very much, Alan, for that presentation, and Jacinth for explaining the permitting process. Think because of we're sort of going down this road, we may need to just clarify at some point what kind of interventions we need permits for. And I think we have that, but just in case there's some clarification, we, as I say, we have funding for fencing and funding for vegetation. We are going to purchase the vegetation in advance because we didn't get it up this year. So we're going to try to, because our monies need to be used by the end of March. So our main issue now is to try to find a source for what is the right kind of vegetation that we can plant next year. And our snow fencing, we've got it in hand, and so we can put it up next year.
Yeah, I would just suggest too that whatever type of vegetation you plant, just don't mow around it. So again, it's all that, it's a physical barrier to the geese. So
Yeah. Super. I see some notes here in case you haven't seen. Thanking you very much for a very, very informative, informative information, and that it was well done and very informative. So thank you very much. And thanks everyone for signing on and for participating. So we'll be back. There's some claps appearing on the screen as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
hopefully we